Undead and Married is a romantic vampire cozy mystery and is book one in Andy Lo's Blood Bond Agency series. The series is published by Squabbling Sparrows Press and is also available in ebook and paperback.
Chapter 1. Eva straightened in the large leather chair behind her grandmother's desk at the Blood Bond Agency. Reaching out, she splayed her hands wide on the ornate inlay top in a move reminiscent of her grandmother. Nope, it didn't help. She still felt like an imposter. As she did every spring, Eva De Silva had left for 2 weeks' vacation in Greece to recharge her batteries. As on previous departures, Eva's grandmother had muttered about wanting to embrace the Mediterranean diet. She was still muttering about it when they'd nailed shut the lid on her specially designed travel coffin. To be fair, on returning from previous jaunts, Georgia had looked centuries younger. However, it wasn't thanks to her helping herself to salads featuring copious amounts of feta and extra virgin olive oil. Instead, it was the ancient vampire helping herself to the blood of virile young Greek men that led to an improvement in her skin tone. It wasn't a beauty treatment Eva had tried herself, happier drinking from a mug than a human. A trickier proposition before blood banks. With the way Georgia had gone on about the sanctity of her Mediterranean break, you would have thought that her health was at risk. Whereas the only reason she refused to delay, or heaven forbid cancel her vacation, was a nasty case of vanity. The closer it had gotten to her scheduled departure date, the more frantic her search for Eva's parents became. They had always taken over management of the agency in her absence, and Georgia saw no reason for that to change. At least until it had come time for her to pack, and she still hadn't found them. It was then she stated Eva would be fine running the agency in her absence. It was an assertion decidedly lacking in conviction, and hardly a vote of confidence in her granddaughter's abilities as a matchmaker. And now that she sat in the hot seat, Eva fully supported her grandmother's misgivings. The only plus about babysitting the agency was that Georgia had cleared her diary. All Eva had to contend with was taking bookings for her grandmother's return and making sure the place didn't burn down. It was what her parents did when they were in charge. With the agency closed at weekends, she'd had 2 nights to get used to the idea. 2 nights spent fretting about messing things up when she officially took over and faced the demands of clients. And some of those clients could be incredibly demanding, especially the matriarchs of the older clans. Eva turned to examine the portraits that peppered the back wall of her grandmother's office. That the eyes of every portrait followed her was as creepy as it sounded. She would have happily turned the lot of them to face the wall if it wasn't for the chance the subject would arrive unannounced. Eva would deal with creepy over scary any night. To ignore their scrutiny, Eva returned to straightening the pens and pencils sitting in front of her. They hadn't needed straightening on the previous 2 occasions, but that hadn't stopped her. No matter how mundane the task, it had given her a sense of control. While some vampires would have jumped at the chance to be in charge of a marriage agency as prestigious as the BBA, she wasn't one of them. Instead, she was relieved the darkly paneled reception area was empty. So too was the oxblood leather Chesterfield sofa next to a coffee table piled high with the latest magazines. The last thing Eva wanted on her first actual night on the job was one of those dreaded matriarchs making an unscheduled appearance. Sure, she knew the basics, and had even had luck setting her friends up on dates, even dates that had led to marriage. The only thing she'd made them swear to was to never reveal how the matches had come about. But doing it for a real deal client? That was a different story altogether. It was something neither Eva nor her grandmother were keen for her to undertake. Along with pats on her shoulder and a nowhere near encouraging, "You'll be fine," she'd received strict instructions not to attempt any matches. "Unless it's unavoidable, it's best you don't, dear." What her grandmother neglected to say was that if Eva completed a disastrous match, it could lead to inter-clan rivalry. Bad bonds had even resulted in bloodbaths in the past. Realizing she was clasping and unclasping her hands, Eva flapped them about, purging the negative energy that had pooled there. All she had to do was stay the course for 2 short weeks. 14 nights. 336 hours. Eva was up to her armpits in a death spiral of worry when Didi Polanski, the company receptionist cum bouncer, called out. "There's been another one." Eva didn't need to ask what the vampire referred to. The murders plaguing their neighborhood in recent days were all anyone was talking about, be they vampires or the general populace. After swiveling the chair to one side, Eva got to her feet and walked briskly into reception. Eva went nowhere slowly, it wasn't in her nature. While there was a newspaper open on the reception desk, this was only for show. Dee Dee's attention was firmly on the tablet, sitting out of sight on her lap. Not something the receptionist would have dared if Georgia De Silva was on the premises. Eva's grandmother embraced the old ways and viewed technology as the very devil. Unfortunately, so did a lot of the agency's clients. Hence, the dummy newspaper was in plain view. Eva folded her arms atop the high counter. That's the fifth one. Where did they find the body this time? Dee Dee scrolled down the article, hissing through gritted teeth and stabbing at the screen as though it were an actual newspaper. In the alley. Eva's brow wrinkled before darkening. The alley? As in the one right behind our building? Yep, that one. They're getting closer every time. That's too close. Far, far too close. It was no surprise they hadn't heard the murder or the subsequent crime scene investigation. The back wall of the property was solid granite, without windows or obvious openings. No matter how much noise the police captain and his underlings made, Eva and the others wouldn't have woken up. Another backpacker? Dee Dee nodded slowly. Eva's hands tightened on the countertop. And this one, were they completely drained too? Again, Dee Dee nodded. Eva loosened her grip on the counter before asking another question. And it was a woman? Dee Dee frowned in response. Eva stepped away from the reception counter. That is so not a good look. The last thing we need is unwanted attention while Georgia is out of the country. Not once in the centuries that the Blood Bond Agency had operated had there been so much as a hint of scandal. Eva knew for sure it wouldn't be any of their clients responsible for the murders. The old clans were experts at flying under the radar, literally sometimes. With age came power, and the best way to avoid that whole villagers with pitchforks and flaming torches scenario was by being smart. No, the murders slowly closing in on their premises had to be the work of a particular variety of vampire. Nouveau sang, said Eva and Dee Dee in unison. New blood. A vampire made, not born, and in this case very new. One who, in their first undead years, had little to no control over their thirst. One who didn't think but simply acted, their bloodlust blinding them to all reason. They were still for a couple of beats before Dee Dee voiced a thought that Eva had already dabbled with and discarded. Eva shook her head hard, her silver hair flying around, forming a halo. No, I don't buy that. It can't be Lilith. Have you seen how much house red she pilfers from the client entertainment fridge? Dee Dee opened her mouth to respond, revealing a glimpse of fangs. That's a point. There's no way she could snaffle as much as she does and drain backpackers without exploding. Dee Dee gave in to girlish giggles, something that was at odds with her age, immortal for over 1,000 years. At the other extreme was Lilith, the agency's newest hire, if you could call 6 years new. She was also the youngest on the premises by a long shot. Looking at her was enough to have Eva feeling ancient some nights. The Welsh-born goth was not yet 23 when she lost her life to a client of Love Bites, the local feeder's dating agency. A vampire without the skills or desires to turn her properly, he'd simply seen her as a late-night snack. It was something that still irritated the young woman. If not for Georgia De Silva coming upon her, she would have been left in a half-state and a danger to anything with a pulse. Me, a zombie? I don't think so. I'm far too pretty for that, was a refrain often heard whenever her elevation to the ranks of the undead came up. A gamer and hacker in life, her programming skills were invaluable in bringing the agency up to date. But only to those in the know, and Georgia De Silva most decidedly wasn't one of those. Dee Dee peered intently at her tablet. Whoever was responsible, that was the most brazen to date. They didn't even try to hide the body. They left it out in the middle of the alley where anyone could have driven over it. Eva snarled. Kinda hard for Captain Useless and his lot to ignore the murder this time. She didn't have a high opinion of the head of the local law enforcement. His spectacular lack of arrests was down to a combination of incompetence, inaction, and good old-fashioned bribery. It's as if the murderer wants to get caught. The words had barely left her mouth before Eva sprinted for the stairs. Rather than descending into the basement, she headed up, eventually exploding through the door at the top and onto the roof. At the corner of the parapet at the back of the building, she leaned over and sniffed deeply. She moved along, repeating the process. It was as she suspected. She returned to reception as swiftly, finding Dee leaning back in her office chair, completing lazy rotations. The receptionist stared at the ceiling high above their heads, although not for long. She rocked forward, her ice blue gaze landing on Eva as though she had been there all the time. Let me guess, there were no traces of blood in the alley, meaning she didn't die out there. Eva nodded, confirming the receptionist was right. If she died out there, I'd have been able to detect traces of blood. Other than a whiff of rodent, there was nothing. Okay, so the killer is out to have someone else take the fall. Again, Dee had voiced Eva's own thoughts. There was only one problem with the theory. But Georgia has the skinny on everyone in town. Who'd be stupid enough to implicate her? Again, the two vampires went quiet before yet again speaking in tandem. Sebastian. Perhaps speaking was too kind, with the women hissing his name as if to get rid of the aftertaste. Anything to avoid the abhorrence that saying his name could elicit. Sebastian Draco, the owner of Love Bites, was a thorn in Eva's side at a personal level. He'd also do anything to see the Blood Bond Agency out of business, anything. Eva pushed herself away from the reception desk, marched over to the windows, and swept the velvet drapes to one side. There was no missing their competition on the other side of the square. The obscene flashing neon lips atop Love Bites' front doors made sure of that. No, not even he's that stupid. And anyway, it makes no sense. It's kinda hard for the murderer to pin the deaths on Georgia when she isn't even in the country. Dee slid the tablet into the top drawer of her desk. Unless whoever was responsible didn't know that. We didn't exactly advertise her departure. She fell silent, her brow creasing as much as her vampire blood would allow. But Georgia isn't the only De Silva they could be targeting. You know that, right? Eva thought about it for a beat. Yes. Unfortunately, I do.
If you've enjoyed this chapter, we'd love it if you could give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to continue the story, you can subscribe and tap the bell to be notified when the next chapter is released.